Some people warn you about strangers. Nobody ever warns you about the people who know your coffee order, your fears, and exactly how much you're worth. I should have seen it coming. Looking back now, every piece was right there in front of me, laid out like a map I didn't know I was reading. But grief does something to your vision. It narrows it down to just the next hour, just the next day, just surviving until the ache in your chest becomes something you can breathe around. After my wife passed, I wasn't reading maps. I was barely reading the room. Margaret died on a Tuesday in March, 18 months before any of this happened. Pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis to the last breath. I held her through in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and other people's prayers. We had been married for 39 years. I was a high school history teacher for 31 of those years, and I used to tell my students that history only makes sense in hindsight. You live through the events without knowing their significance. You only understand what something meant after it's finished. I understand now what those 18 months meant. After I retired, Margaret and I had plans. Portugal in the spring, a vegetable garden that actually produced more than just zucchini. Weekend drives with no destination. She had a list in the kitchen junk drawer, written in her careful, looping handwriting, titled simply, "Things We Haven't Done Yet." After she died, I couldn't open that drawer for 6 months. When I finally did, I took the list out and put it in the cedar box on my nightstand, next to her reading glasses and the last birthday card she ever gave me. I kept the house. My son, Daniel, thought that was a mistake. "Dad, the maintenance alone is going to drain you," he said, maybe 3 weeks after the funeral. He was standing in my kitchen drinking coffee from a mug that had Margaret's handwriting on it. She'd taken a pottery class the year before she got sick and made a whole set of mismatched mugs, each one slightly lopsided and completely irreplaceable. I watched him drink from that mug and I felt something shift in me. Some quiet alarm I didn't have the vocabulary to name yet. "I'm fine here," I said. "It's a big house for one person. It's my house." He smiled the way he'd been smiling at me since the funeral patient. Practiced the smile of someone managing a situation. Daniel is 56, with the kind of careful grooming and neutral wardrobe that makes him look like he belongs behind a desk, explaining your options. He works in commercial real estate, has for 20 years. He's good at it. He understands property the way I understand the Missouri Compromise, thoroughly, strategically, and with a clear sense of what it's worth. I love my son. I want to be clear about that. I still love him. In the complicated, excavated way, you love someone who has shown you something true and terrible about themselves. But at that point, standing in my kitchen 3 weeks after I buried my wife, I looked at that patient smile and I thought, he's not worried about me. He's worried about the house. I told myself I was being unfair. Grief makes you suspicious. Grief makes you see threats in ordinary kindness. I pushed the thought down and refilled his coffee, and we talked about the weather and his daughter's soccer tournament, and I told myself I was wrong about him. I was not wrong about him. Things settled into a kind of routine over the following year. Daniel called every Sunday. He and his wife, Claire, came for dinner once a month, always bringing a bottle of wine I didn't particularly want and a dessert from a bakery that was too sweet. Claire is a careful woman. She laughs at the right moments and asks follow-up questions and always remembers to compliment something about the house, as though she's appraising it in real time. She'd been that way for as long as I'd known her, which was 22 years. I had never fully warmed to her, and the feeling, I always suspected, was mutual. My daughter, Susan, lived in Portland. She called more than Daniel did, talked longer, asked questions that actually required answers. She had her mother's habit of going quiet when she was thinking something she wasn't sure she should say. I missed her. She couldn't get back for the holidays that first year, and I felt her absence the way you feel a draft constantly, in the background, making everything slightly colder than it should be. It was sometime around the 14-month mark when Daniel started talking about the finances. He was careful about it. That's what I remember most, how careful he was, how measured, the way he parceled out his concerns over weeks and months so that no single conversation seemed alarming. First, it was a general observation about inflation, then a mention of property taxes going up in our county. Then, one Sunday phone call, a suggestion that I might want to consolidate some of my accounts. Just for simplicity, he said. It's a lot to manage on your own. I managed the family finances for 30 years, I said. I know, Dad. I just want to make it easier for you. There it was again, that word, easy, as though my life were a problem that needed simplifying, as though I were an equation that had gotten too complicated and needed to be reduced. I was 64 years old. I had my pension, my Social Security, Margaret's life insurance, and a house that was paid off and worth, in the current market, somewhere north of $400,000. I was not confused. I was not failing. I took my medications, drove myself to my doctor's appointments, and was reading my way through a stack of library books that would have taken most people a decade. I was lonely, and I was grieving, and some mornings the silence of the house felt like a physical pressure on my chest, but I was not diminished. And there is a particular kind of insult in being treated as though you are. My 64th birthday was in October. Daniel called a week before and told me he and Claire wanted to take me to dinner. Somewhere nice, he said. Hendrick's on 5th. It was the kind of restaurant that didn't put prices on the menu, which I had always found mildly pretentious, but which Margaret had loved for special occasions. The fact that he chose it made me soften a little, made me think maybe I was reading him wrong. Maybe the months of gentle financial suggestions were just a son's clumsy worry and not anything colder. That sounds good, I said. We might bring a few people, he added. Just some colleagues of ours. Thought it would be nice to have a real celebration. I said that was fine. I should have asked more questions. But I was 64 and I hadn't been to Hendrick's in 2 years, and some part of me was tired of being suspicious of everything. The evening started normally enough. I drove myself another small point of pride I held onto and met Daniel and Claire in the lobby. They were dressed up, which pleased me. Daniel had his arm around Claire's waist in a way that seemed genuine. There were 2 other couples already seated when we got to the table, people I didn't know, introduced as colleagues. A man named Garrett, who had the firm handshake and empty smile of someone who charges by the hour for something. A woman named Patricia who asked me twice what I had done before I retired, both times with the same expression of polite disinterest. Another man, younger, who said his name was Marcus and immediately started looking at his phone. I sat down and ordered a glass of Cabernet and told myself to relax. It was my birthday. The restaurant was warm and low-lit, and the bread was excellent. I talked to Daniel about a history podcast I'd been listening to. I told Claire the earrings she was wearing were beautiful, which was true. I tried to place the odd undercurrent I was feeling and couldn't. Everything looked correct. Something still felt wrong. It was about 40 minutes in we'd finished our appetizers and were waiting for the main course when Daniel reached into the leather bag he'd set beside his chair and pulled out a manila folder. "Dad, while we're all together," he said, "there are just a few things I'd like to go over." I looked at the folder. I looked at Garrett, who was sitting up slightly straighter. I looked at Marcus, who had put his phone away. "What kind of things?" I said. "Just some documents. For your protection, really." Daniel was using his careful voice, the management voice. "Now that you're on your own, it makes sense to get some things formalized. A power of attorney, updated beneficiary designations, a simple property management agreement so that I can handle things if you ever need me to." I went very still. "We talked about this, Dad. About making things simpler." "We talked about me simplifying my accounts," I said. "We didn't talk about power of attorney. It's a precaution. Everyone should have one. I have one. Your mother and I set one up years ago. That one's outdated now." He opened the folder. There were papers inside, already tabbed with those little colored sticky flags that tell you where to sign. I counted at least 6 of them. "Garrett is a notary," Daniel said. I looked at Garrett. He nodded and gave me the empty smile again. The room had gotten very loud and very quiet at the same time, the way it does when your blood pressure spikes. I could hear the clink of silverware from other tables, a woman laughing somewhere near the bar, the particular sound of a busy restaurant continuing to exist while my world rearranged itself around me. I thought of Claire looking at my house every time she visited. I thought of Daniel's careful financial questions, month after month after month. I thought of how he'd chosen this restaurant, Margaret's favorite, where I would feel sentimental and lowered and perhaps more agreeable than I might otherwise be. "I'd like to read these before I sign anything," I said. "Of course," Daniel said. "That's why we're here. Garrett can walk you through them." "I don't need Garrett to walk me through them. I can read." The table went quiet. Claire picked up her wine glass. I was reaching for the folder when I became aware of someone at the table to my left. We were in a corner section of the restaurant, the kind of semi-private arrangement of tables that creates an illusion of separation without actual walls. The table beside us had two women, both of them in their 30s, one of whom had clearly been working. There was a briefcase under her chair and papers on the corner of the table, half covered by the tablecloth. She'd been there when we arrived. I noticed her because she was looking at me. Not obviously, not rudely, but she was looking at me the way someone looks when they've overheard something they recognize. Our eyes met for just a moment. She glanced at the folder in Daniel's hands, then back at my face, and she gave a very slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Just once, barely. Then she looked back at her dinner companion and continued her conversation as if nothing had happened. But she reached into her jacket pocket, took out a business card, and without looking at me, set it on the edge of the table between us, close enough to my side that I could take it without reaching far. I looked at Daniel. He was watching Garrett arrange the papers. I picked up the business card and turned it face down in my palm. "You know what?" I said, keeping my voice as even as I could manage. "I've had a couple glasses of wine, and I don't want to sign legal documents tonight. My lawyer should look at these first." Daniel's face changed, just slightly. Something tightened behind his eyes. "Dad, these are straightforward. There's nothing to be concerned about." "Then there's no reason my lawyer can't look at them. We have Garrett here specifically tonight." "I'm not signing anything tonight, Daniel." The silence that followed was the most honest thing that had happened all evening. It was the silence of a plan being interrupted. Claire set her wine glass down very carefully. Garrett gathered his things with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with complications before. Marcus started looking at his phone again. We finished dinner. The food was excellent, and nobody ate very much. Daniel was polite in the brittle way of someone saving a larger conversation for later. I talked about the history podcast again, more than I needed to, because it gave me something to put in the silence. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I took a different route back, past the bar, and around the long way, and I stopped at a quiet corner near the coat check and looked at the business card for the first time. Elena Vasquez, J.D., Estate and Probate Law, Vasquez and Partners. There was a handwritten addition in small, clean letters below the printed number, a cell phone number, and 3 words, "Call me tonight." I stood there for a moment with the card in my hand, and I thought about Margaret. I thought about a conversation we'd had, maybe 7 or 8 years earlier, one of those late-night kitchen conversations that happen after the dishes are done and the house is quiet. We'd been talking about the future in the abstract, as you do when you're in your mid-50s, and the future still feels more theoretical than urgent. "Daniel worries me sometimes," she had said. She was drying a bowl, not looking at me. "He's fine," I said. "I know he's fine. I don't mean the way he is now. I mean the way he might be." She paused. "When we're not here to see it." I'd put my arm around her and said something dismissive and kind, the way you do when you're not ready to hear what someone is actually telling you. She'd let it go. She never brought it up again. I had never thought about that conversation again until I was standing by the coat check at Hendricks on 5th with a stranger's business card in my hand. I drove home with the radio off. I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. Then I made a cup of decaf and sat at the kitchen table and called Elena Vasquez's cell phone. She answered on the second ring. She told me she was an estate and probate attorney. She had been at the table beside ours with a colleague. She had overheard enough of the conversation to recognize the situation. She had seen the tabbed folder, heard the word notary, understood what was being arranged. She said she hoped she had overstepped. She also said she didn't think she had. "What was in those documents?" I asked. "I didn't see them. But a power of attorney, in the right hands, gives someone near complete control over your financial and legal decisions. Combined with a property management agreement and updated beneficiary designations, all signed in one sitting, with a notary present and multiple witnesses at the table. She paused. That's not a precaution. That's a transfer. I sat with that for a moment. What do I do? I said. She told me to do nothing yet, to not sign anything, which I hadn't, to not confront Daniel directly, not yet. She asked if I could come into her office the next morning. I said yes. I slept badly, which surprised me. I thought the anger would keep me awake, but it wasn't anger I felt lying in the dark that night. It was something closer to sorrow. The specific grief of understanding that something you hoped was not true has turned out to be exactly as true as you feared. I thought about the house. 31 years of paying that mortgage, Margaret's garden in the backyard, the room I'd painted 3 times because I could never get the color quite right, the kitchen where my kids had done homework and argued and grown up and left, the cedar box on my nightstand with Margaret's reading glasses and the birthday card and her list of things we hadn't done yet. And I thought about Daniel drinking from her pottery mug. The next morning, I went to Elena Vasquez's office, which was in a building downtown that I'd driven past 100 times without noticing. She was younger than I'd expected from her voice, mid-30s, calm without being cold, the kind of person who uses silence as a tool rather than a discomfort. I liked her immediately. I told her everything. The 14 months of financial suggestions, the way Daniel had talked about the house, the birthday dinner with its convenient cast of colleagues. She listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, and when I finished, she asked me several specific questions about my current documents, my assets, and what exactly Daniel had access to. He had a key to my house. I had mentioned, at some point, where I kept certain documents. He was already listed on one of my bank accounts, a joint account Margaret and I had set up years ago for household expenses, which I'd never gotten around to changing. How much is in that joint account? Elena asked. I told her. She wrote something down. I want you to go home this afternoon, she said, and I want you to get every paper document you can find, related to your finances, your property, your will, and your insurance policies, and I want you to bring them here or put them somewhere Daniel does not have access to. Today, I told her I would. Then I said, my wife had a cedar box on the nightstand. I've never opened the bottom drawer of it. She kept it locked. Elena looked at me for a moment. Do you know where the key is? I didn't. I told her Margaret kept things like that in a specific spot, the bottom of a ceramic bowl on her dresser, the one shaped like a leaf that her sister had given her years ago. I had never looked there because I had never needed to look there. I had been living in a house full of Margaret's things for 18 months, and I had been so careful not to disturb any of them that I had never looked. I went home. I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed. I still couldn't say that without it feeling like a concession, and I picked up the ceramic leaf bowl and turned it over. A small brass key fell into my palm. The cedar box had a main compartment and a flat drawer in the base that I had always assumed was purely structural. I put the key in and turned it, and the drawer slid open without resistance. There was a single white envelope inside. My name was written on the front in Margaret's handwriting. Not Harold the way she usually wrote it, not Hal the way she called me, just my full name, in careful letters, like something official. I sat there for a long time before I opened it. I don't share everything she wrote. Some of it belongs only to me. But what I will tell you is that Margaret had seen what I hadn't let myself see. She had noticed things over the years, conversations between Daniel and Claire that stopped when she entered rooms, questions about property values asked too casually, Daniel's increasing interest in our financial advisor's name and phone number, small things, individually easy to explain away. She had explained them away for a long time because he was her son and she loved him and she didn't want to believe it. Near the end, she wrote, when she understood how little time she had, she stopped explaining them away. I don't know if I'm wrong, she wrote. I hope I'm wrong, but if you're reading this and something has happened that makes you question what you know, please don't do what I did and wait for more proof. Some things don't get better with more evidence. They just get worse. She had written the name of an attorney she trusted, a friend from her book club who had moved into law after her children grew up. The name was different from Elena's, but the instinct was the same. "And Hal," she wrote at the end, "don't you dare let them have that house. We built it together. You keep it." I sat on the edge of our bed, and I let myself cry in the way I hadn't let myself cry in months. The hard, ugly kind, with no dignity to it, and when I was done, I washed my face and called Elena Vasquez. I told her about the letter. She listened. Then she said, "Okay, let's talk about what we do next." What came next was not dramatic in the way dramatic things look in movies. It was paperwork and phone calls and careful, deliberate steps taken over 3 weeks while I maintained the appearance of ordinary life. I called Daniel on Sundays. I deflected his questions about the unsigned documents with vague references to talking to someone that I knew would frustrate him without tipping my hand. I watched his patience thin over the phone in the way you can hear someone trying to stay level when they aren't. Elena had me move quickly on several fronts. The joint account was removed from Daniel's reach before he'd thought to check it. My will was updated, properly witnessed, filed with the court. The power of attorney that Daniel had wanted so badly was signed, but to Susan, in Portland, who cried on the phone when I told her what had been happening, and then spent the next hour asking me if I was eating enough and sleeping enough and seeing friends, which was, I realized, what she had always done, and which was the difference between someone who is concerned about you and someone who is concerned about what you have. There was the matter of Garrett, the notary, and whether what had been attempted at the birthday dinner constituted anything actionable. Elena reviewed it carefully and said it was in a gray area. Nothing had been signed. No crime had technically been committed. What existed was a pattern, a clear intent, and a letter from my deceased wife that painted a picture any judge would understand. Daniel came to the house 3 weeks after the dinner, unannounced, which was something he had never done before. I saw his car in the driveway from the kitchen window, and I took a breath and I went to the door. He stood on the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking past me into the house, and I understood then that this was what he had been looking at all along. Not me, the house behind me. "You changed the locks," he said. "I did. Why would you do that?" "Because it's my house." He looked at me then, and for just a moment the careful management face dropped, and what was underneath it was not malice exactly. It was something more tired and complicated than malice. It was the face of someone who had convinced himself a long time ago that what he wanted was also, somehow, what was right. That his judgment was better than mine. That his management of the situation was kindness, dressed up in legal documents. "Dad, I read your mother's letter," I said. He went very still on my porch. "She knew, Daniel. She knew for years. She didn't want to believe it, and she didn't say it while she was alive because she was protecting you from yourself. I'm not going to do that." I kept my voice level. I had practiced this. "Your sister has power of attorney now. My will has been updated. My accounts are in order. There is nothing here for you to manage." The stillness stretched between us for what felt like a long time. "I was trying to take care of you," he said. He almost sounded like he believed it. "No," I said. "You were trying to take care of the house." He left. He didn't slam the door or raise his voice or say anything that could be used against him. He was too careful for that. He walked back to his car with the particular dignity of a man who is recalculating, and I stood in the open doorway and watched him go. That evening, Susan called from Portland. She had talked to Daniel. He had told her, she said, that I was not thinking clearly and being irrational about the estate, which she reported to me in a voice so dry it was almost funny. "He said you changed the locks because of something Mom allegedly wrote." "Not allegedly," I said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment in her mother's way. "He told me you needed someone to manage your affairs." "I have someone. It's you." "Yeah." Another pause. "Dad, I should have been paying more attention. You were in Portland. That's not a reason." "It's not an excuse either," I said. "You had your own life. That's what you were supposed to have." She came to visit the following month. She stayed for a week, which was longer than she'd stayed since Margaret died. We went through the junk drawer together and found the list of things we hadn't done yet, and we read it out loud at the kitchen table. Some of the items were funny, The way Margaret's humor had been quiet and unexpectedly specific. One of them just said, "Learn to say no to Daniel," with a small asterisk and no explanation. Susan looked up at me when she read it. "She knew," Susan said. "She always knew," I said. "Daniel and I have not spoken since that afternoon on the porch, and I want to be honest with you about what that feels like. I am not going to tell you I'm at peace with it. I'm not going to offer you a clean resolution tied up with insight about forgiveness, because grief and betrayal don't actually resolve that way. They settle. They become part of the weight you carry, and, over time, you get stronger, not lighter. One morning you wake up and the weight is there, but it doesn't buckle you. That's the closest I've found to peace. What I will tell you is that I kept the house. I'm sitting in it right now. The room I never got the color quite right in. The kitchen, where Margaret made her lopsided pottery mugs, one of which I drink from every morning, because I find that I can now. The backyard garden that has gone a little wild in the way of gardens that aren't being tended, not ruined, just unchecked, which is how some living things prefer to be. I've been taking care of it, slowly, not restoring it to what it was, because it was Margaret's garden and I'm not her, but making it something I can tend in my own way. Last weekend I planted a row of marigolds along the back fence because I found a packet of seeds in the garden shed with her handwriting on a label she'd made plant in fall, bloom in spring, and the timing was right. Elena Vasquez's number is still in my phone. She sends a card at Christmas, which I appreciate. I talk to Susan on Tuesdays and Thursdays now, a standing call that we both take seriously. She is planning to visit in April, and we are going to cook from the Portuguese cookbook that Margaret bought the year she died for a trip we never took. I found it on the shelf, and it still had the receipt tucked inside the front cover like a bookmark. Margaret was always doing that, using whatever was at hand, the small human habit of marking where you stopped. I pulled the receipt out and looked at it for a long time, because it was dated 2 weeks before her diagnosis, and it told me something I didn't know until that moment. She had believed in the trip. Even that close to something she couldn't yet know was coming, she had believed enough in the future to buy the book and put a receipt inside it and set it on the shelf where she could find it. I believed in it too. Now, I set the receipt back inside the book, in the same place, and I put the book on the counter where I can see it while I have my morning coffee. There are still things on Margaret's list we haven't done yet. Portugal, the vegetable garden that produces something other than zucchini. The weekend drives with no destination. I am 64 years old, and my mind works fine, and my body works fine, and I have a house that is paid off, and a garden that is learning to be mine, and a daughter who calls twice a week, and a stack of library books, and more years ahead of me than some people get, and fewer than I would like. I am not ready to be simplified. I am not ready to have my edges managed and my future arranged and my choices made for me by someone who has already decided that my time for making choices is over. I think a lot about what Elena said on the phone that first night, after I'd explained everything and gone quiet. There had been a pause before she spoke, and what she said was not legal advice. It was just something she said. "They always count on you not wanting to believe it," she said. "That's the whole strategy. Your love for the person makes you wait longer than you should." She wasn't wrong, and I don't resent having loved my son enough to wait, to doubt myself, to give him the benefit of a doubt he wasn't using fairly. That love was real. It's still real, in the complicated, excavated way. Love doesn't stop being real when the other person turns out to be something other than you understood them to be. It just changes shape. But I'll tell you what I've learned from all of it. The part that I want you to take with you when you leave. Your clarity is not a symptom. Your independence is not a burden for someone else to carry. When someone who is supposed to love you starts making quiet arrangements around the edges of your life, starts talking about simplifying and protecting and taking care of you in ways you didn't ask for, you are allowed to. Ask what's in the folder. You are allowed to say you'll have your lawyer look at it first. You are allowed to change the locks. And if a stranger at the next table sets a business card on the edge of the table and gives you a single small shake of their head for the love of everything good, pick up the card. Margaret left me a letter because she was afraid I would need it. I needed it. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm only ashamed it took her hiding something in a locked drawer for me to finally hear what she'd been trying to tell me for years. I kept the house. I keep her garden. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I talk to my daughter, and every morning I drink my coffee from one of Margaret's lopsided mugs, and every time I pass the kitchen shelf, I see the Portuguese cookbook, with the receipt inside it, marking the place where she stopped, waiting for someone to pick it up again, and keep reading. I intend to.